is the chat feed. One of the best uses I tell my students for the chat feed is to share quotations from the text that you have questions about or that are your favorites and you want to discuss and share your insight with the rest of us. So of course, other things are welcome in the chat feed too, but again, one of the best things is direct quotations so we stay grounded in the author's words. And then finally, I think everybody can see, but just to be extra sure, right up at the top, it says that this meeting is being recorded. We hope to be able to share it with people in the future. So please keep that in mind as we do our discussion. So with that said, I like to start my classes with open discussion, and that means I don't speak first. My students speak first. And so you're not quite students, but you're discussing the book together with me today. Who would like to kick us off? Who has an interesting insight or maybe a response to one of the prompts? Who's brave and would like to share some views on Coates?
Whether it's bravery or insanity, I'll simply step out on the plank, but only to start off with a kind of more of a generic. It is interesting from my perspective how similar, in a sense, and generic the whether we call it the Black experience is, throughout even the diaspora. And I just found, myself in general, I had no aha moments. I had a lot of aha moments, which is like saying, yeah, huh? Been through that, seen it, done it, and so forth. But through it all, it's to be appreciated. And I say his clarity, his wisdom, and the sagacity of the whole thing, that is him talking to his son. How many of us have had to have that, I say, a talk with the son, but he's thinking about, in a sense, passing along a legacy, passing along the wisdom. It's not just about survival. It's about the quality of that survival. I often phrase it this way. I have to give my son, when I stand publicly, people may think, well, Pritchard, we guess your son's going to be different because he has a father like you. He's really going to have it made in certain regards. But the reality is, I must give the son two competencies. One could be academic, and the second is cultural. He'll never get to use the first one unless he can survive, in a sense, and thrive in the second. That overwhelming reality informs everything we do. I love his, he hit our experience, totally, just like as if you had a roulette wheel and every number on it represents a part of our experience. Well, indeed, as we turn the wheel, he's hit just about every one of the experiences that we all have in common. And I'll just stop there because I hope the ice is now broken.
Thank you so much, Forrest. And as always, there's a lot of wisdom in what you say, especially like the density of the text. I find myself resonating with at least one sentence every paragraph. And sometimes I'm highlighting the whole paragraph because it's got such gravity behind it. And then the lesson to Samori, the lesson to his son, I hear that, he's trying to give him a leg up, right? That he shouldn't have to relearn all the things that Ta-Nehisi struggled to learn. And then that big lesson is the struggle itself, that it's worth it, that if you don't struggle, the system is going to chew you up and spit you out. So it has to be a struggle to learn, a struggle to know what's going on. And one of his big things, too, is that there aren't any easy answers or master narratives that are going to explain it all away. Yes, and sir. I don't know that I got that when I was 15, but I also don't know that anybody told me that when I was 15. So for Samori, I'd kind of like to see an interview with the son to see what he thinks of the book.
Indeed. I can interject there without interrupting you too much. I mean, just for everybody's benefit, how our histories hang together. What I normally do if I was in the public, I use the line about struggle. Frederick Douglass once said, without struggle, there is no progress. So I would ask the young people present, what areas do we need to have progress in? And actually, it covers every area of existence, from your own personal development to engagement with the society, engagement with your neighborhoods, but that we indicate these things will not come easy. It does involve struggle, and it does involve analysis of that empirical world and so forth.
Yeah, thank you again, Forrest. The dream it involves a vision of perfection, and so progress is somehow done within the dream. And I think Coates does an amazing job showing that it's a fiction and a fantasy, and that we all need progress across all sectors of America, and I think by extension, the planet. We've heard from Forrest and myself now for a few times. Who else would like to jump in and again share a question, or maybe a response to one of the prompts, or maybe share a quotation in the chat feed? Yeah, my mother's next. Jon Radwan, please share.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What I would like to share is that I had an overwhelming sense of sadness reading the book, and reflecting on all of the difficulty that Coates experienced, Coates and his fellow race. That it's just not fair. Really, really not fair. And the overwhelming repetition of the children of Black people have to be twice as good, twice as smart, it's just overwhelming. And I enjoyed the book, don't get me wrong, but a real sense of sadness overcame me. And I didn't know if other readers felt the same.
Oh, yeah, I did. I was rereading it for today, and I wasn't weeping, but I was tearful. And that's because I've read it 3 times before. So the tears are already, part of it. And so it's like the scale of it all. And so like his ending is fairly pessimistic. We're going to destroy both ourselves and the planet. And we kind of can't stop ourselves because too many of us are addicted to or lost in a dream of finished superiority rather than any ethic of brotherhood and sisterhood and working together to solve problems. So that Coates still says the struggle. So there's both the tragedy along with the beauty. And especially for him, the beauty he finds is in his experience at Howard University, the beauty of the Black diaspora. And then he also finds beauty in his family and especially in his son. So once Samori is born, he says he has, more to lose, more skin in the game. And it's not anything he regrets at all. It's a wonderful and a beautiful thing. So it is super sad, but I would also say it would be even sadder if this all was happening and we were all ignorant of it. So it's super tragic. And at least we have people like Coates who are facing the struggle head on and are writing not just writing in the sense of like history and telling us what happened, but writing in deep, poetic, visceral language where you can almost start to feel it. And I don't even want to say almost, I did feel it. That's why I've taught this book for a few years, and I'm probably going to keep teaching it. It's why I volunteered to do this today. I hope everybody could feel both the tragedy and the beauty and join the struggle along with Ta-Nehisi and hopefully Samori and hopefully a lot of people.
Did everybody hear that the state of Georgia did enact legislation that yesterday, February 23rd, would be Ahmaud Arbery Civil Rights Day? And so maybe, just maybe, there's a little crack, and we're going to be kinder to each other and recognize wrongs.
I fear that Coates would say that gets to be another thing that gets added to the MLK Day Assembly for Black History Month. And it's just, unfortunately, one more tragedy that, I don't know, I want to be hopeful. I want to be with you. And let's move on to Kate next. I saw Kate's hand go up.
Thanks, John. I'd like to go after Mrs. Radwan because I want to congratulate you on doing a super job with your son and certainly infusing and instilling a lifelong love of reading and sharing his passion with others. So thank you, and it's great to have you here. The comment that I wanted to make was what really struck me throughout the book was Coates's inquisitive nature and his love of reading, and how much information that, how that really helped to shape his views of his experience growing up and his experience in Chicago and as a Black man. So I guess a question that I'm interested in putting out there for the group, or something I'd like to talk about, is how much we all see that, with our students, for example, that love of reading, and he just wanted to get more and read more. And that was so influential in his experience at Howard, feeling the presence of all of these great authors there. And sometimes I feel like with my students, maybe that's not the case as much, maybe that they're not having that love of reading and just wanting to have more and more. So I was interested in, John, in the world of communications, what your experience has been with that, and anyone else who has a comment. But thank you so much, John.
Yeah, Kate, that's a good one. The ritual in the library at Howard, that's his education. He learns from history class, and it's not like he's completely down on his professors, but the classroom is someone else's agenda. And the library is his free zone to learn. And he's a disciplined lover of books, so he does learn. His ritual is to go daily and to check out 3 books from authors that his professors and friends have recommended, to study them. He takes notes, he copies out quotations. So by the time we get to the publication of this book, it's a part of him. The wealth of Black knowledge at Howard is channeled through him, and he can not just list names, but list, really deep concepts and realizations. So like one of the big realizations I remember from that period of his life is he was trying to compete with the dream, to have a Black trophy case to put next to the white trophy case. And he, toward the end of that period, starts to realize that trophy cases themselves aren't going to solve anything, and you're just kind of buying into the priorities of the dominant group. And so any domination starts to become problematic. And then that, to bring it back full circle to school, somebody else's agenda, I think of it and hope it's an enlightening agenda when I teach class, but I do have to admit I'm the professor, and sometimes the committee did it, but it's an agenda. In a way, I deeply admire Coates to be brave enough to say, no, I don't have to go to class. I'm busy in the library, and I got to go again, and I got to go again. And so he doesn't graduate, and he's still now today a successful person. So the schools weren't the right path for him. The streets weren't the right path for him. He forges his own path of journalism and scholarship and study, and thankfully teaches all of us. Jonathan, your hand is next.
I just had a quotation I wanted to share because I think it speaks to that point that both Catherine and you made, that he says, but all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. So it's very much for him, in some ways, the inherited vocabulary of talking about race actually obscures that racism is something visceral and acts on bodies.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's the exact quote that I chose for my NCA paper last year. So Kate asked about the communication perspective. The words, the rhetoric are surface level and often distractions and euphemisms. And what Coates teaches is that the reality is bodies in contact patterns, and super sadly, a long-term systemic pattern of brutality is our country's history, and it's our country's tradition. So that's a lot of his explanation behind the Prince Jones tragedy, is that this is nothing new. This is sadly predictable, and it's got extra twists to it because PG County is a black county, but it's still America, and it's still patterns of domination, and those racist patterns land with brutal force on bodies. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, by the end of the book, he's making the connection beyond just bodies toward Mother Nature, that it's brutal domination of, and the rape metaphor is frequent, and really it's kind of not a metaphor, right? So it's a pattern of domination that unfortunately is, in his view, his pessimistic view, is going to destroy all of us together. That's a tough one to follow up on, but it's a tough book. Would anybody else like to talk about books as Kate described, or bodies as Jonathan raised?
I'll just say amen. No to his. I remember, if it's appropriate for me to draw the parallels between his writing and then our universal experience. At one point, I was attending a predominantly very white male college, 800 white men and maybe 10 men of African descent on the entire campus. And I was in a situation where we were having a discussion, and everybody was being very polite, so to speak, and I had to stop everything to let them know how I was feeling and do it. And then literally, I think the way I described my pain in the moment, which was really dealing with, the walls that they had built up around their own implicit supremacy of white bodies, and how I was feeling angry, I was feeling hurt, broken, and they're looking at me like I was an alien because they could not understand. And that's why I wanted to stop everything and explain that. So I really appreciated how he indeed he painted that picture using many palettes of color. That's how I would best explain that.
Right, Forrest. The dreamers are lost in the dream, and waking them is too big of a job for any individual. Coates says that one person is not going to change the world. They might be able to change something local. And so again, he's got a fairly pessimistic attitude, but still the struggle is both super important and tragic and beautiful all at the same time. Linda, I think your hand was up next.
Well, ever the optimist, I'm encouraged by the fact that we are having this conversation. And I think that has been a very big shift in our society in the last 2 years, since George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm grateful for that. I just want to make the connection between Ta-Nehisi Coates and James Baldwin, who I enjoyed a class in with Professor Green last semester, and hear a lot of echo of James Baldwin in Ta-Nehisi Coates's writing. In fact, The Fire Next Time, which is Baldwin's novel, he opens it with a letter that he pens to his nephew. And I can't remember, I'm sorry, I read the book a while ago and passed it on to my daughter. So I don't have it in front of me, and I don't remember, and John, maybe you do, how he brings Baldwin into the book, because I really feel like the anguish, as someone, I was reading in an article, the cold-eyed stare down of white moral innocence that Baldwin brought forward, as well as Ta-Nehisi. I wonder how, if you recall, how Ta-Nehisi makes the connection to Baldwin himself in that book.
All right. So the compositional echoes, he said, were deliberate. So he admired Baldwin and is doing a new version of the same kind of letter genre, right? And then page 133 is where there's the invocation from James Baldwin. And so I can type it once I'm not talking, but I'll read it now that I'm talking. So, and have brought humanity to the edge of oblivion because they think they are white. And so I see him pulling from Baldwin two of his central ideas. The first one is that whiteness, or really any race, is an idea rather than a genetic reality. And then the other part is the oblivion theme, which is unfortunately, the pessimism theme, that this belief in superiority, really any belief in superiority, any belief in dominance, is not local. It is infectious. And so before you know it, the whole world is pursuing at the expense of the other. And we're headed, in Baldwin's phrase, toward oblivion. Does that help a little bit? Is that where you're going?
Yeah, thank you.
And anybody else is welcome to respond to Linda's comment as well, but I think Tracy's hand is next. Tracy, I think you're muted. I'm sorry, I still can't hear you. Yeah, I'm really sorry, Tracy. You could maybe try the chat feed, and really don't feel alone. I taught online for over a year. This is a very common experience, to have a tech glitch and have somebody's machine not recognize.
Can I just make a suggestion?
Join, then rejoin. It works. I've had that with my students. I don't know if Tracy wants to try that.
And also, Tracy, if you have Zoom open, make sure that Zoom is closed, because Zoom and Teams compete with each other for the audio sometimes. So I usually have to close one if I'm using the other.
Okay, looks like she's going to log out and log back in. And
can I ask a question while?
Yes, of course, Kelly, go ahead.
Hand raised, because I did have a couple of comments. First of all, I'm going to admit that I have not, it's been a while since I read the book. I didn't see this event coming up, so I did not get a chance to review it. I just would like to say that. But something that occurs to me, and it actually relates very closely to my role in helping to choose the summer reading for our first year students, is that, and I listened to Forrest's sort of characterization, and I think about some of the other comments that we were just talking about whiteness, and it has me really wondering. I feel as though this and says yes, and a white person sees this and says, "Huh." So I wonder if it's more. I wonder if white people should read it. Like it's almost like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's like Coates is telling Black people, this is the experience that I've had. It's probably very similar to the experience that you had, but it's really telling white people some things that they may not really think about. And I think that that's really important. I'm going to tell you that my son did not go to Seton Hall, but it was his summer reading. And I would really like to see it as our summer reading. So the other part of my question is to see what people think about that idea for a summer reading. Thank you.
Well, I don't think I get a vote, but I'll vote for it. And then for the audience, that's another communication thing, right? So it's written as a letter, which is a private genre, but it's not a letter. It's a book, and it's a book that's a New York Times bestseller. So everybody's the audience. The world is the audience. And then I would say, yes, I mean, Toni Morrison says it's required reading. I don't think she says it's reading just for one group. I would hope I interpret her as saying it's required reading for everybody. And, really one of the things that it starts to get at, and this is the lesson that he started to get from a very young age with his mom teaching him to write, is your own culpability, that nobody's perfect, that the kid in class who is in trouble for a reason. There might be an oppressive teacher too, but there's also self-interrogation. And so interrogating all the culpability starts to get him, over his career towards something that's a full book and an explanation that we can benefit from. Tracy, I see you've rejoined us. You want to try again? I'm so sorry, we still don't hear you. Tracy, I'm afraid if your microphone's not working, the only recommendation I have now is the chat feed, and it takes a little bit longer to type out your question or comments, but we can still deal with it that way.
Sometimes guests can't access the chat. I just sort of add that little problem.
Okay.
Yeah, that she might be able to. I'm just mentioning it.
It looks like she's typing something, maybe.
I would like to just add that I think that I would like to see this as a summer reading at Seton Hall. I wonder if, let's see how I say this. I wonder if people will feel that it's too in your face in terms of this, sort of dichotomy of experience, and that we do read what I would call controversial books, but they don't end up being that controversial. And not that this is, but per se, at least I don't think it is, but I just worry about its tone, and whether we think we could get sort of buy-in. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there. Well,
I don't understand the final approval process, but I hope no fearful people have veto power. So the pain is worth it. The sadness is worth it, because, like we mentioned before, the alternative is ignorance. And so if it's too raw, in my opinion, that's because we're wounded, and we should acknowledge that we have a national wound, and maybe look at it and think about how to try to heal it. So the toughness of the book, like as I mentioned at the beginning, I've taught this to 3 different classes now. My students give me feedback at the end of the semester. It's anonymous. And if you want high scores, you don't do anything tough. You do the easy stuff, and you give them good grades for doing the easy stuff. But if you're an actual educator who wants them to learn things, you give them challenges. And one of the ways I've been taught how to speak about that is from our good colleague who's now at Brookdale Community College, Angela Kariotis. One of the watchwords of today's generation of students is safe space. And I try to steer them toward Angela's concept of brave space, where that's what school's for, is to come together and be courageous with one another and share what we actually think and what we actually feel about important things like large-scale domination. And if we don't do that, what's it for? Just maybe stay home and play a video game or watch TV. Again, on my planet, this is required reading, and I hope you're successful in getting it passed by English.
It's not the English department, just to be very clear.
Okay.
It's a larger body, but thank you. I appreciate it. I was really also interested in your experience of teaching it, so thank you for that.
Yeah, one student mentioned it was uncomfortable. And so one student out of 3 classes, and uncomfortable is not a problem, right? So like comfort in discomfort is one of Coates's themes. That's what the struggle is. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be soft, but it is going to be real, and it is going to be true.
And this is not fiction. This is reality.
Thank you, Forrest.
I'm not too sure if I was going to ask others a question. Others, in terms of reading this book, and the question, it almost sounds like, is this not a universal family? Meaning that even though you may not look like he and his son, if there was pain in your family being caused by, quote, things in your environment, what is your attitude then toward What is happening to your loved one? What has happened to you?
And especially when he was describing the generational pain, Forrest, I kind of fortunately couldn't relate, right? I'm from a different group. I don't have ancestors who were enslaved that I'm aware of. I didn't grow up with a neighborhood where fathers were, 50% dead due to state violence. What I did relate to him on was the generational things. I'm only 5 years different from Coates.
Yes, sir.
So the TV shows he grew up on are the same TV shows I grew up on. I was tangentially aware of the Malcolm X movement and in rebirth of attention to Malcolm X that initially inspired him. And, so maybe other people are better at answering that question than me, but it still resonates. It's a very human thing. And I think it's kind of beyond just generational. It's right and wrong and love and violence. Alexandra, I think your hand was next.
Yeah, thank you so much. And to really tie in what you said and what Kelly was speaking about, I think something that's so special about this book, and Coates no doubt deliberately had in mind, was the format which the information is conveyed. Having it a letter to his son allows others to be in a space to observe and to also feel the difficult information and the uncomfortable information and the real life experience that he is recording and is sharing with the world through this specific letter to one specific person. And I think in that way, it allows him to be real about information that would be otherwise considered controversial, because these are real life accounts. It's not controversial inherently, but when he puts it into a letter, he allows people to feel safe enough to not call it that. And I think there's something one very, very special and powerful that he's able to reach so many audiences, but then two, there's something very disappointing in realizing that we have to basically whitewash hard information in that way to make it palatable to larger audiences.
Yeah, I think you're on a great track, Alexandra. The letter format is so personal, and the personal is what gets you out of troubles with vast generalizations like talking about slavery. So he has one passage where he says slavery isn't, just a mass of flesh. It's individual people, it's individual slaves. And he does a brief few paragraphs on an imagined experience of an enslaved woman with all of her likes and dislikes and idiosyncrasies. And that makes it just so personal and so real. And then you're correct, the whole form of the book is personal and real. And that's a lot of its power. And then also, I think it's, and maybe this is some of my fields coming in here, but one of my questions is about his atheism. He's very clear that he doesn't have, he has respect for, but he doesn't have a faith. And that I see at least some resonances with the Christian tradition in his focus on bodies and individual persons, that personalism is a Catholic thing. And I'm not really aware of how much religion he's studied, but I see more in here than I think he might say. So the lack of hope isn't very Christian, but the attention to persons in their lived experience, full bodies, heart, mind, and spirit together. I see that as a Catholic kind of idea. Greg, you're next. Gregory Floyd.
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I want to borrow Kelly's apology too. I saw this rather late in time. I went to the library on my lunch hour today to pull out a copy to reread in the future. And I had a year where I read Black authors because I thought, wow, I went to an Ivy League university in the 70s and read no Black authors except a few that I chose from my own desire to read. I think that's criminal. just on one respect. And what I wanted to, so I may be combining some authors that I read, but here's my overwhelming memory of reading Between the World and Me. The whole book in my mind is reduced to one image, a takeaway image that has stayed with me in the few years since I've read it. That's the image of telling your son where to put his hands when he gets stopped by the police. I've got 3 boys and 6 girls, and I've spent a lot of time with each one of them. We call it father-son time, and we've talked about lots of things, lots of philosophical things, lots of spiritual things, lots of real life things. But I never had to tell my boys where to put their hands if they got stopped by the cops. And that brought the horror of what he's writing about in my face. So, you know, I love your colleague's notion of brave space. And I wish, and maybe it's happening in ways that I don't know, but Seton Hall is by far the most diverse university of any university my kids have gone to, and 2 of my kids went to Seton Hall. But how could we create brave spaces to encounter one another here at Seton Hall? I think that would be enriching beyond words for us as colleagues to do. But that 8 and 12 on the steering wheel is unforgettable to me. And that's the power of great writing. It's just simply unforgettable. It's horrifying. And it makes you want to weep all over again. But it is powerful beyond words. Even though it's words, the image is powerful beyond words.
You're making me think of the scene when they go to the theater and they're going down the escalator, and the white woman, I guess, is in a hurry and pushes Samori, and he dares to object loudly, and the white man stands up to defend the damsel in distress. The words from the white defender are, "I could have you arrested." So rapidly escalating a minor escalator scene into a law enforcement scene is, he says he's ashamed of that because he put his son in danger. He knows better. The kid's only 5. He knows the danger, and he lost his cool, and you know he's making up for it by telling Samori about it now, so Samori can learn from the experience. But it's you know a massive injustice, and he's still having to deal with it in civilization, right? He's on the escalator at a nice theater in New York City, and there was a little bit more in what you said, but I'm sorry I forgot, and I've been talking a lot, so I want to move to the next person in our line. After Greg, I think it was Monica.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Greg, for bringing that up. I think I have 2 comments. The first is that scene about the steering wheel definitely resonates, and it really reminds me of some training that the DEI committee does. Every month we do anti-racism training, and we always share during our trainings a New York Times mini film series called Exploring Race, Bias, and Identity. And we always show a short clip on a conversation about growing up Black. And it talks, it kind of follows these young men through just anecdotes of them with their encounters with the police. And, you know, one of the quotes that really sticks out to me is a young man who's probably 11 or 12 says, you know, how I am perceived is not up to me, right? So, you know, he can be just walking down the street and it doesn't matter. It's the color of his skin that people notice first and may react in any sort of way. And he has to be ready for that. And it always breaks my heart, you know, as a mom, and thinking about what that thought process is for a young boy that is 11 or 12. So that's the comment. And the second is, you had mentioned brave spaces, and this is something that we talked to our students a lot about, especially given that we are really trying to foster this idea of belonging and inclusion for all. And in order to do that, we really have to practice empathy, and we really have to practice, like you said at the beginning, Jon, kind of being prepared to be uncomfortable, right? These conversations are not easy. And I think once we set the tone with students and say, these are our expectations or our community agreements for today before we launch into this conversation, we expect, mutual respect, we expect participation, but we want you to make sure that you're demonstrating empathy and respecting the viewpoints that are different from your own, and providing a space to be wrong, right? And not immediately being judgmental about it, but allowing that conversation to flow.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. That was what I was trying to remember to respond to with Greg. So I think you did a good summary of Brave Space training. The first step is just introduce it as a concept, right? So you're not here to be safe. You're here to be intellectually challenged. And so, yes, if it is physical safety, then please tell me right away and I'll do everything I can. But if we're talking about intellectual safety, that's not what school is for. We're here to stretch horizons and give your brain a workout. And then one of the things I try to do in class discussions is that I'll go first and I'll try to demonstrate intellectual humility and encourage everybody else to share. So like I tried to do in my introduction today, I'm not an expert on race and I'm not a parent. That doesn't mean I can't learn from Coates. I'm in the position of most people where you can't be an expert on everything, but our complex world is charging forward. And if we're going to do well at all, we have to try to figure out how to deal with things without earning an advanced degree in them. And then that first step becomes joining the conversation, being brave enough to join the conversation. I guess the next person is Jon Romberg.
Yeah. One thing that I found extremely interesting, and this flows out of, Jon, your focus on the body and the lived experience from the perspective of a Black man talking to his son, is that racism operates upon him. And particularly coming from a legal perspective, we're used to differentiating between intent and impact, and thinking about that racism is defined by, or the conventional view of racism is defined by someone with individual animus. And I think at this point, at least in New Jersey, we're still allowed to talk about critical race theory, but the idea of racism operating at a systemic, even unconscious level, and the effect of systems and rules and practices and implicit biases and unconscious mentoring of people who are similar to you, I think is really important to understand. And part of the letter from him to his son allows him to express that in a way, I think, that, as Alexandra was pointing out, is eye-opening to white readers. And one interesting thing is that I think he, like Ibram Kendi, is defining or understanding racism in terms of the effect it has and the systematic disadvantages it imposes on people of color, which is distinct from, I think, both how civil rights scholars understand there to be a difference between discriminatory intent and discriminatory impact, both of them being problematic, but them being distinct. And I think many Black scholars are using the word racism as a blanket to cover the field, which I think is interesting and provocative. I think it causes the kind of backlash that Kelly was talking about in some of our students who haven't thought through these issues. And I don't have a developed position, but I think it's really interesting, the battle over vocabulary, in the same way that the battle over who's a woman, say, is obviously, really, it's a matter of semantics, but I think it really causes a lot of the controversy and the backlash that ideas I think many of us in this conversation share. And I don't have a developed opinion about what words, how the words should be used, but I think it's an incredibly fertile ground for discussion, certainly in the realm of law, but I think also in just culturally in general, and certainly in all of our classes in whatever subject area.
Yeah, thank you, John. I think you're on such a good track there. The intent issue, or the bad apple issue, sometimes it's called. It's just, from Coates's view, it's irrelevant. You probably did have a bad intent, police officer who just killed Prince Jones, but it doesn't matter. How did you even have that job in the first place? How is there even a state apparatus that works this way? So it's a lot bigger than traditional violence trials where you're trying to figure out what one person did. If you take that bad actor off the street is still owned by the gangs and brutalized by the police in West Baltimore. So it's still the street. It's the systemic issue is, at least at Seton Hall, it's something we can still talk about, systemic racism, and it may be a taboo topic in other parts of the country, but it's something that this book obviously deals with. And I forget who referenced Kendi before. It might have been you, John, but I'd love to do another one of these on Kendi's book. Sign me up. I'm brave. And then also, like I think Forrest mentioned at the beginning, I'm also kind of crazy. I'm insane enough to put my toe into this difficult water to try to learn. I think Elise's hand was next.
Yes, thank you for this. This has been such a enlightening discussion. And there's so many things coming through my mind, especially thinking about all of the discussion we've just had about, brave spaces and comfortable versus uncomfortable, and the escalator incident in the book. Particularly as a white woman, my comfort and safety is all too often, placed above and used as a weapon against the lives of Black people in this country. And because of the white supremacist system that we live in, and it doesn't even matter what my intentions are or what I would think. What matters is that, I'm a white person, I'm a white woman, and so I'm used by the system against another group of people. And so I think that at the very least, my responsibility as a person with this privilege in this society is to get uncomfortable, is to put myself in these situations where I have to face the realities that I wouldn't have had to face if I didn't put myself into a class where we talked about this or chose to read this book. And that's the very least I can do. I mean, there's a lot more that I can and should, and we all can and should, but the comfort of white people in this country is placed at too high of value, and especially in inverse to the lives and the safety of Black people in this country. And so to Kelly's point, to put this on a reading list is, extremely important, and people might best up against it and not be too comfortable with it. But I think we need to not prioritize that anymore. And I think Coates is very clear here that he's not necessarily optimistic, but he knows that that's the struggle is for all of us. And my struggle as a white woman is not to struggle against, I don't have the adversities, but to struggle against reality and living in reality and doing what I can to make others see.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. Coates puts the dilemma between safety and justice and says that the dreamers would rather have safety than justice. And I think the patterns are pretty clear that's how it's been going. Safety for one group at the expense of everybody else. And then for your return to the theme of summer reading, Kelly, you're getting lots of encouragement from this group, so please be brave and try to pitch it. And then
I expected nothing else from this group.
Well, but then I want to say let's look forward a little bit. Like, what if there is some controversy around it? Wouldn't that be a good controversy to have? That it's not just one brave class; it's the university was brave enough to tackle a difficult issue, and not alone, but tackle it with an award-winning author who is widely respected. If you're not up on Ta-Nehisi's career, he's back at Howard, he dropped out of the school that he loved and did well on his own, and the school recognizes him as somebody who should be teaching there, and now he's got an endowed chair. And so if Howard can read, Howard University can read Coates and hire him, maybe the least we can do is pick up one of the books and read it as well. I do want to recognize Sean over in the chat. He said he had trouble with audio, but I'll read his comments out loud. Want to echo the words of our colleagues in that I think it's the raw realness which encourages the reader to examine their own engagement with the very issues discussed in the book and lead to these larger discussions as we're having now, but on the national scale, to address the heavy burden which exists for so many Americans every day. Essentially a national brave space, which, yes, it is an amazing concept, is needed to advance these sorts of dialogues which are so needed. So, you know, I thought bravery was an American value, and then some of our contemporary rhetoric seems to be validating what Coates said is, no, it's safety that's the American value, and anybody who's not into that is likely to suffer. I'm scrolling further down into the chat to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Oh, you're welcome, Sean. Yeah, How to Be an Anti-Racist is the other book we mentioned, and it's another controversial one. And the controversy is around the idea of systemic racism. Kendi's book, in my opinion, is so clearly written. It's not a letter like this that's got rich imagery. Instead, it's textbook style definitions of sociological concepts that once you've got that vocabulary down, you have a much better handle on race dynamics in our country. And so highly recommended.
I'd just like to add, it's got some really amazing narrative as well to complement the more academic kind of how-tos, if you will. So I think the combination of those is very powerful in that book.
Right, like every chapter starts with a definition of a key term and associated terms, and then he plays it out through narrative. So you're right. It's not just a textbook. It's like a really good textbook that has a human dimension along with a scholarly slash I would just say dialectical dimension, where he defines his terms exactly what he means, and then shows you how to use them to interpret cultural events. We're coming up here on just about 1 or 2 minutes left. Would anybody like to have the last word on Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates? It's a big job, I know. Okay, I'm the facilitator, so I'll give the last word. First, thank you all for coming. This has been a wonderful event. Thank you to the DEI committee at Seton Hall and Soma Cross Cultural Works. And thank you to Greg Floyd and to Mom. And then for future events, please stay in tune. The DEI committee works super hard to announce everything that's going on. Next month is Women's History Month, and I nominated Suzanne Langer as a woman who deserves a spotlight. She was recognized as the first American female philosopher. And so that's just one tiny little thing they're doing for Women's History Month, is putting a highlight on key women that, you know, members of our community nominate. Monica, did you want to say a little bit more before we wrap up?
Sure. I just wanted to thank everybody for spending your Thursday evening with us, and thank you to Dr. Radwan for facilitating this discussion on this very important topic and book. We really appreciate your participation and your thoughts and suggestions. And it's a really great chance for us to continue to advance equity, inclusion, and social justice on campus and also in the wider world. So if you have suggestions on other events or programs to really further these important conversations, please, you can email us at dei@shu.edu, or you can reach out to Jonathan Farina or myself directly. Dr. Floyd, did you have a last comment?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I had one last comment, more of a reflective one in the form of a question. I know Coates is pessimistic, but doesn't the encouragement to continue the struggle hold within it a seed of hope? because if you have no hope, you don't struggle forward. So
Yeah.
I think he may have more hope than he knows.
I think he has more spirituality than he knows. It's there. It's just, he's clear that he was raised by atheists, and it took him a long time to understand MLK, and he resonated with Malcolm X at a young age. I think he might get there. And so who knows what his next book will be in the next book, and I hope we'll read some of them.
Amen.
I just wanted to add too, especially to those of you who are not Seton Hall members, to not be shy and feel free to reach out to us with any ideas for books and readings. We're really glad that you joined us.
Yes, thank you all for being here. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Kelly.